Bugün IMF'e borcunu kapatmış, veren el konumunda olan bir Türkiye olacak.
1970 yılında Devlet Planlama Teşkilatı Müsteşarı olarak 10 Ağustos'ta yapılan para operasyonunda hakikaten gerek hazırlanışında, gerekse bu operasyonun yapılışında, bilahare tatbikatında önemli görevler aldım.
Turkey's 73 years of adventure with the International Monetary Fund began in 1947. The first standby agreement with the 189-member IMF was signed on 1st January 1961 for a one-year period. Up until today, Turkey and the IMF have signed 19 standby agreements. For a very long time, Turkey was dependent upon help from the IMF. For example, in the period of Bülent Ecevit's rule in 1978.
Maliye Bakanımız Sayın Ziya Müezzinoğlu ile yaptığım görüşmelerde kendisinin uluslararası para fonuyla ve ilgili başka bazı mali kuruluşlarla yaptığı görüşmelerden bu umutlarımızı doğrulayıcı izlenimler edinmiş bulunuyorum.
OPEC member countries increased the oil price by 150% twice in 1979 and 1980. This oil shock rattled the Turkish economy as the unemployment rate jumped to 25% and inflation climbed to 70%. Many basic everyday goods went on to sale on the black market. Fuel, oil, and propane lines extended across the streets. Turkey's trade deficit reached astronomical figures as Turkey was going through a very painful period. Political leaders could not reach the necessary agreements at coalition meetings. Meanwhile, people were dying in the street fighting.
Ülkenin büyük meseleleri vardır. Can ve mal güvenliği, yani güven oyu alabilecek kurullarımız meseleyi tetkik edecek.
After this period of suffering, the government made a number of liberal economic adjustments, what are known as the January 24 decisions, that came into effect. These decisions, announced on January 24, 1980, aimed to curb inflation, fill in the foreign financing gap, and attain a more outward-oriented and market-based economic system. Based on these decisions, export subsidies were granted, and exchange rates were allowed to float to make Turkish exports more competitive, which would lead to the promotion of export-led growth. According to this program, the Turkish lira devalued by 37.2%, and a daily exchange rate announcement was initiated. It suggested measures to reduce the share of the state in the economy. In line with the adjustment in the state economic enterprises pricing, agricultural subsidies were limited. With these decisions, subventions were removed, except in the fertilizer, energy, and transportation sectors. The country's foreign trade was liberalized, and foreign capital investment was promoted. Imports were gradually liberalized. Exports were promoted through tax refunds, low-interest loans, custom exemptions. Residents were permitted to hold foreign currency, foreign exchange deposits, and to make payments via foreign exchange. Importing and exporting all kinds of securities was allowed. On top of the January 24 decisions, the capitals market law was also enacted. The Istanbul Stock Exchange was established. Credit valves, which had not been seen until then, were opened. Turkey used $1.75 billion in loans. The IMF was more than happy with all these developments, although critically the public disagreed. There had been no practical developments affecting the pockets and finances of Turkish citizens on the street. In 1980, democracy was suspended in the country by a coup that would have fueled all these economic and political crises. The government was brought down by a military coup launched on the 12th of September. As soon as Turgut Özal became prime minister in 1983 after the coup, Turkey was again knocking at the door of the IMF to seek solutions for the economy. Özal signed a standby agreement with the IMF.
Önümüzde yeni bir dönem vardır. Bu yeni dönemdeki 10 yıl sonunda ana hedefimizin muasır medeniyet seviyesine yaklaşmak olması lazımdır. 10 yıllık bir dönemde muasır medeniyet seviyesine aradaki farkı kapatarak yaklaşmak ilk bakışta çok zor bir hedef olarak görülebilir. Ama inanıyorum ki doğru ve gerçekçi politikalar uygulandığı ve milletimizin teşebbüs gücü tam manasıyla ortaya çıkartıldığı zeka, kabiliyet ve çalışkanlığı seferber edildiği takdirde bu hedefe varılması zor olmayacak.
The IMF had given Özal's government its full support for the January 24th decision to be made permanent. Özal stalled the IMF for a while, bringing down inflation with a bitter prescription. Exports, share of gross national product was increased to 11%. The relief being felt in politics was also being breathed into the country's economy. 10 years after 1984, Turkey did not need to go to the IMF, but the country's debt grew day by day. Due to these accumulated debts, the IMF was watching Turkey closely, but no new agreement was signed until 1994. In 1994, Turkey experienced one of the most severe economic crises in its history. The Turkish lira melted down 150% against the US dollar. Inflation skyrocketed to 160%. The free market punished the government of Tansu Çiller for its refusal to pay interest on treasury bills. In just a few days, $4.2 billion left Turkey, which had $7 billion in foreign exchange reserves in its coffers at the time. Interest rates climbed to 400%. Once again, the government desperately sought the IMF's help, but this time the prescription was very, very heavy.
Ekonomiye ilişkin aldığımız bir dizi önemli kararları sizlere açıklamak üzere karşınızdayız. Uzunca bir zamandır ülkemizde ekonomik sorunların giderek büyüdüğünü fark etmekteyiz.
500,000 people were out of work when the April 5th decisions, as they came to be known, were implemented. 800,000 shops closed as dollar and interest rates rose rapidly. After the April 5th actions, economic stability was not achieved. On the contrary, a difficult process had begun, and this process would lay the groundwork for the 2001 crisis. Moving forward to December 14, 1997, Turkey's relations with the European Union have been strained. The Prime Minister of the period, Mesut Yılmaz, slammed the union on a number of points.
Yanlış yaklaşımlarla kabul edilmesi mümkün olmayan art niyetli siyasi koşullar dayatılmak istenmiştir. Dönem başkanlığının beyanları bu yaklaşımın arkasındaki zihniyeti daha da belirginleştirmiştir. Bu yaklaşım ve zihniyet değişmedikçe ilişkilerimizin yapıcı ve çok yönlü bir diyalog içinde geliştirilmesi beklenemez.
On February 19, 2001, after a meeting of the National Security Council, President Ahmet Necmettin threw a book copy of the Constitution at Prime Minister Ecevit, which only raised political tensions further. Prime Minister Ecevit then stood in front of the cameras and publicly complained about the president.
Bugün son derecede üzücü bir olay oldu. Milli Güvenlik Kurulu toplantısının açılışında gündeme geçilmeden önce kamu görevlilerinin önünde Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı söz alarak son derecede terbiye dışı bir üslupla bana ağır ithamlarda bulundu. Devlet geleneklerimizde yeri olmayan, eşi görülmedik bir davranışta bulundu.
This fight at the top levels of government had cost the country dearly. In a matter of hours, about $5 billion was withdrawn from the central bank. The stock market collapsed. Interest rates skyrocketed. Overnight interest jumped to 7,000%. Turkey had to sign its toughest deal with the IMF in the 2001 crisis. Bülent Ecevit's government received a $19 billion loan from the IMF after lengthy negotiations. During this period, the IMF's bitter prescriptions were much debated. Carlo Contarelli, the head of the IMF's Turkey desk who was conducting the talks, was honored for his work. The IMF's agreement to grant $19 billion in loans had sparked an almost festive mood in Turkey. However, the Turkish population continued to be crushed under new austerity policies.
Sayın Başbakanım, al terbiye esnafım, terbiye esnafım. Çekilenler önce çekin.
Var olan yardım taahhüdüne ek olarak 10 milyar doların aşağı yukarı kesinleştiği anlaşılıyor. Sayın Derviş'in bugünkü demecinde de belli. Sayın Köyler'in konuşmalarından da belliydi. Fakat henüz tabii bu resmileşmediği için bir gündem ve program söz konusu değil. Zaten programımız var. Uluslararası Para Fonu'yla o bağlamda herhalde gerekenler yapılacaktır.
The government put senior World Bank official Kemal Derviş in charge of the economy to solve the crisis. Derviş announced his program of transition to a supposedly strong economy. Before long, a letter of intent was sent to the IMF. 15 new laws were passed in 15 days in Parliament. Several ministers resigned while these laws were being enacted and implemented.
Dış kaynak bu programın önemli bir boyutu. Bizi içeride biraz rahatlatacak, yatırımların hızlanmasını sağlayacak, istihdam açısından işsizlik karşısındaki engeli aşmak için dış kaynağın da sağlanması çok önemli.
The public punished those who plunged the country into chaos at the ballot box. After these elections, the AK Party, which entered elections for the first time in November 2002, was the clear victor and could rule alone. The AK Party leadership was taking over a country that had hit rock bottom economically. AK Party, which ensured political stability, had mastered fiscal discipline with its successful moves. Turkey became the world's 17th largest economy and Europe's 6th largest economy. During the 2008 financial crisis that ravaged the world, Turkey decided not to enter into a standby agreement with the IMF. Turkey owed the IMF $24 billion in 2002.
Dünya Bankası da bazı projelerini yeniden gözden geçirecek. Belki bazı projelerinde bir artış olabilir. Fakat dediğim gibi hep kaynak üzerine durmayın. Evet. İnşallah bir gün biz Türkiye olarak başkasına kaynak aktarırız. Ben o günleri özlüyorum doğrusu.
Those days that Kemal Derviş said he missed became real with the new AK Party administration. Turkey paid the last installment of its debt to the IMF on May 14, 2013, and one period in Turkey's history had ended. With that payment of $422.1 million, Turkey had no debt left. Turkey paid the IMF a total of $23.5 billion in the 10 years before that date. That's more than the gross domestic product of over 100 countries. These IMF loans, which were formulated in the name of economic assistance and maintaining stability, have resulted in indebted countries becoming even more dependent on the international system. The IMF is noted for pursuing policies that prioritize the collection of debt rather than the development of the country to which it's lending. Turkey has launched a historic struggle against the terror state that imperialist countries are trying to establish on their borders as a union. Erdoğan's administration was disrupting a 100-year plan with its historic moves in Syria, the Eastern Mediterranean, and Libya. At this point, the economy was the last battlefront for those who could not bring Turkey to its knees in the field. And now, exchange rate hitmen are back on the scene. First came the brazen threat to Turkey from US President Donald Trump. Trump shared this on his Twitter following the announcement that he would withdraw from Syria. Trump said in a Twitter message, quote, "I would destroy the Turkish economy like I did before."
As I have stated strongly before, and just to reiterate, if Turkey does anything that I, in my great and unmatched wisdom, consider to be off limits, I will totally destroy and obliterate the economy of Turkey, I done before.
Turkey's currency faced a series of attacks from London-based financial institutions that engaged in the rapid buying of foreign currencies with Turkish lira, prompting the country's banking regulator to put a percentage cap on currency swaps. Turkey has blocked 3 foreign banks, BNP Paribas, Citibank, and UBS, from doing foreign exchange transactions with the Turkish lira. Turkey's Banking Regulation and Supervision Agency has said, quote, "These banks failed to complete their Turkish lira commitments and so defaulted." This is not the first time the lira has come under foreign attack. Such attacks were made during a 2018 currency crisis that wiped out some 30% of its value, and a similar incident happened in March 2019. London's message was clear: "I have more Turkish lira in my hand than you have. You can't compete." Swap steps were put in place against London's attack on the Turkish lira. The dollar, which was trading at around 7.20 Turkish liras at one point, declined over time, and so London's game saw its reply from Istanbul. London-based economic hitmen are once again in shock. Turkey's economic staff and experts under the coordination of Treasury and Finance Minister Berat Albayrak surprised London. They had to pay a historic interest for the Turkish lira, which they could not sell short and replace. Economic hitmen working with credit rating agencies also drew their guns at Turkey's economy, but could not succeed. The corona epidemic, which started in Wuhan, China, and spread rapidly around the world, has suddenly stopped the wheels of the global economy. The economic effects of COVID-19, which had an impact on the world, came to light. Like all countries, the pressure on Turkey has increased. Just as in health, in the economy, Turkey has managed the process very well. Global trade has slowed. There have been capital outflows from developing countries. The IMF is the first institution that comes to mind in this kind of crisis. The head of the fund, Kristalina Georgieva, said several countries have applied to the institution for support. However, Turkey refuses to negotiate with the international institutions, particularly the IMF.
Well, it is the worst crisis since the Great Depression, but it is more than that, because it is a combination of a health crisis and an economic shock. Normally in a crisis we will boost spending. Now we are telling people don't go out, don't spend.
London, which wanted to turn the epidemic into an opportunity against Turkey, put forward rumors of a reserve meltdown in order to create an economic panic along with the epidemic. Ignoring these rumors, Turkey has extended a helping hand against the coronavirus to countries around the world. 93 requests from 135 countries were met. Since the beginning of the outbreak, Turkey has extended a helping hand to the countries that are most in need and has offered vital support, including medical aid, breathing apparatuses, medicine, and medical protective equipment. So, what will happen to the global financial system in the wake of the corona epidemic? Surely, in the post-pandemic world, the financial system could change. Countries with strong systems of immunity will survive this unprecedented crisis. The transition from a single center-dependent supply and logistic infrastructure to alternative markets has accelerated in the international arena. Turkey is also the leader, a shining star, of the countries that look to a new economic future, which is characterized by a shift in economic structures.
Dünyada Türkiye yeni finansal sistem, ekonomideki bu shift kayma yeni bir süreçte en çok nasiplenecek, faydalanacak, lojistik olarak, coğrafi olarak, altyapı olarak, ekonomik üretim olarak, genç nüfus olarak gelişmişten kaynaklı birkaç ülkeden bir tanesi.
Turkey needs to work tirelessly to have a strong voice in the new world order after the corona outbreak. This relentless crisis will also be overcome by the 18-year historic leap forward led by President Erdoğan and the strong and confident moves by his economic staff. Turkey cannot have a fully independent and national economy if the fight against the global finance barons is not fought now.
Türkiye bir şeylerin, gündemlerin, ajandaların, maddelerin dayatıldığı bir ülke mi olması lazım? Türkiye tam bağımsız diyorsak bu açıdan da belirli bir noktada bu sınamalardan geçmek zorunda. Türkiye bunun bedelini darbelerle de, saldırılarla da, terörle mücadelede de, ekonomik ödüyor. Gerekirse fazlasını da öder ama bağımsızlığından 1000 yıldır, ben tarih kitaplarından öyle okudum. 1000 yıldır bu topraklara gelen ceddimiz her türlü bedeli en ağır şekilde ödemiş, bundan taviz vermemiş. Bugün mü vereceğiz? En azından ben şahidim ki bu ülkenin başındaki lider olduğu sürece hiçbir zaman bundan taviz vermeyecek bu ülke. Biz de onun yanında ölümüne bu mücadeleyi vereceğiz.